Well, it's always great to come back to my home, to Benoni, to South Africa. I love South Africa. I love Africa. It's my home. It's a place I was born, I was raised, and it's always great to come home and give back.
Princess Charlene tried to run away from Monaco 3 times before she had to marry the prince. She smiled for the cameras, but inside she felt trapped in a shiny cage. After disappearing to South Africa for months, Charlene didn't go back home. She went to a secret hospital to hide. Let us take you to the moment Charlene was paid millions to hide her pain. A dream wedding with cracks beneath. It began like every modern-day fairy tale should. In the year 2000, at the Mare Nostrum swimming competition in Monaco, Charlene Wittstock caught Prince Albert's attention. A young woman of stunning athleticism, she glided through the water with an ease that seemed almost ethereal. For a moment, it must have seemed like destiny tapped them both on the shoulder. Yet, what looked so perfect from the outside was already fated to crack. But cracks had already begun to form. From the day Charlene entered Monaco's royal circle, she left behind more than her career. She left behind her independence, her homeland, and quietly, the control of her future. The royal machinery was relentless. Smile here, stand there, wear this. Attend that. Every move scrutinized, every word is measured. While the world swooned over her designer gowns and glittering tiaras, Charlene's sense of self began to erode. The wedding in 2011 was broadcast across continents, a dazzling event dripping with wealth, prestige, and promises. Charlene wore a custom Giorgio Armani dress adorned with tens of thousands of crystals and pearls. Cameras flashed, bells rang, and news anchors called it the event of the decade. It looked from a distance like a coronation of true love. Yet, keen observers noticed her tears during the ceremony, tears dismissed as overwhelming emotion by a palace desperate to control the narrative. Behind the flowing veils and the glitter, Charlene was drowning. The days leading up to the wedding were riddled with rumors that refused to be silenced. Whispers that the princess-to-be had tried to flee Monaco not once, but 3 times. Stories of her seeking sanctuary at the South African embassy in France. Each attempt was crushed before it could succeed. Each rumor met with tight-lipped royal denials. The seeds of doubt had been planted. Was this marriage a union of hearts or a gilded cage locking shut? Prince Albert's past haunted every corner of the palace. Allegations of affairs, acknowledged illegitimate children, paternity lawsuits too messy to contain. Even as Monaco's royal family scrambled to preserve their image, the stains remained. Charlene, despite her bravery, was stepping into a life where betrayal was part of the institution itself. By the time Charlene officially became a princess, she was already living under the weight of scandals she did not create. The citizens of Monaco, trained to adore their royalty, looked up at the palace windows hoping for fairy tales. What they got instead was something else entirely. A woman smiling because she had to, not because she wanted to. Still, Charlene smiled. She waved. She walked the glittering corridors of power. But a deep, aching sadness clung to her, inseparable from the roles she was forced to play. Over the next few years, she would perfect the act. To those watching from afar, she appeared poised, elegant, serene. To those who looked closer, the cracks beneath the surface grew impossible to ignore. Charlene was not simply adapting to royal life. She was enduring it. Each gala, each public appearance, each carefully posed photograph was a silent act of endurance, a quiet battle to survive in a system designed to devour individuality. As Prince Albert maintained the polished surface of public duties, behind closed doors, his personal affairs continued to leak into public view. New allegations surfaced, new paternity claims emerged, and through it all, Charlene's presence became more fragile. Her public appearances grew fewer, her smiles thinner, her posture guarded. If this had ever been a Cinderella story, the illusion had long since shattered. Inside the palace walls, the isolation grew. Her support system was small, intentionally kept small. Friends and allies were rare. Even surrounded by grandeur, Charlene often walked alone, a figure of quiet sorrow in corridors built for celebration. The dazzling life she entered was not a reward, it was a prison. In Monaco, the royal family is not simply symbolic. They are the very brand of the nation: stability, glamour, success. Any public crack in that facade threatens not just a family, but a national identity. Charlene could not afford private sorrow. Her sadness endangered the myth that Monaco sold to the world. The palace machinery adapted. Official statements brushed away rumors. Carefully curated photographs offered illusions of happiness. Public appearances, tightly controlled, painted a picture of unity. Yet, no choreography could fully conceal what was slipping through the cracks. Charlene's distance, her retreat into herself, became too visible to fully erase. It all came to a head in 2021. Charlene traveled to South Africa, the country of her childhood, ostensibly for a conservation project. The trip, meant to last a few weeks, stretched into long, uncertain months. Official reports cited a severe ear, nose, and throat infection preventing her from flying, but whispers suggested otherwise. The absence said more than any press release could. In Monaco's tight, image-obsessed society, her prolonged disappearance from the stage of royal life raised alarms. Was this illness, or was it an escape? Had the fractures in her marriage become impossible to hide? The palace issued cautious, sanitized updates. Charlene missed her 10th wedding anniversary. She missed the Grand Prix. She missed the Red Cross Ball. Traditions that were supposed to anchor the royal family slipped by without her. And in Monaco, where appearances are currency, her absence became a scandal of its own. When she finally returned, she did not resume royal life. Instead, Charlene checked herself into a private treatment facility outside of Monaco. The palace again released careful statements. Exhaustion, emotional distress, privacy requested. But for anyone truly watching, the truth was already laid bare. Charlene was not simply tired. She was fractured, broken under the weight of years of silent endurance. The woman who had once glided through water with effortless grace now struggled just to stay afloat in the gilded, suffocating life she had been drawn into. The fairy tale was never real. The crack had been there from the start, and not even the brightest lights of Monaco could hide it anymore. The price of staying silent. As the golden gates of Monaco glistened under the Mediterranean sun, a different kind of storm brewed behind them. One without thunder, one without warning. Princess Charlene's return from South Africa had not been a homecoming. It was a retreat, not into royal life, but into a cloistered world of whispered secrets, unseen battles, and tightly controlled appearances. She was there, yet she was nowhere at all. After her time in the treatment facility, official statements claimed she needed rest, privacy, and healing. But no carefully worded letter could suppress the questions gathering force outside the palace walls. Across Monaco's polished marble streets and into the tabloid columns worldwide, the speculation grew louder. Was the princess planning to leave for good? Had her escape only been delayed, not denied? The story took a darker turn when fresh allegations against Prince Albert surfaced. A Brazilian woman stepped forward, claiming the prince had fathered her daughter during the early years of his relationship with Charlene. It was not an old mistake dragged from a distant past. It was a betrayal that allegedly happened while Charlene was already trying to build a life beside him. The timing could not have been crueler. Just when Charlene needed to heal, the ghosts of Albert's past barged back through the palace gates, dragging new shame into a marriage already straining under its own weight. For the citizens of Monaco, whose devotion to their royal family bordered on reverence, the headlines were unbearable. For Charlene, they were devastating. There were consequences, but not the kind paraded before cameras. They were private arrangements, negotiated in hushed rooms behind closed doors. A staggering deal surfaced. Charlene would remain by Albert's side for a price. Reports claim she was promised approximately 12 million euros annually to fulfill her role. 12 million reasons to keep smiling. 12 million reasons to stand silently. 12 million reasons to suppress the growing cracks carving through her once vibrant soul. This was not about affection. It was not about forgiveness. It was survival. Damage control, pure and simple. For Albert, it preserved the monarchy's spotless image. For Charlene, it bought security and perhaps the slender hope of one day reclaiming her freedom. But money, no matter how vast, cannot mend a broken heart. With each public appearance, Charlene seemed to diminish. Her once bright eyes dulled. Her presence, once athletic and commanding, grew spectral. She walked beside her husband, but the distance between them was visible, undeniable, a silent chasm widening in every photograph. Public engagements became performances rather than celebrations. The Red Cross Ball, once a glittering highlight, became an exercise in hollow smiles. The Monaco Grand Prix, a roaring symphony of speed and glamour, provided nothing but another backdrop for stiff poses and tired gestures. Charlene was there, but the woman who had first captured the world's imagination seemed to have vanished. Inside the palace walls, tension simmered beneath the polished surface. Prince Albert maintained his outward composure, attending events, shaking hands, and speaking politely to cameras. Yet even his famously calm demeanor could not mask the fracture lines growing inside his marriage. Charlene's absence, emotional if not always physical, haunted every public appearance. Still, she endured. She attended. She smiled, and all the while the golden cage wrapped tighter around her. Some said she stayed for her children. The twins, Prince Jacques and Princess Gabriella, born in 2014, represented Monaco's future. Charlene's devotion to them remained unwavering. Walking away from the palace would mean risking her bond with them, risking losing the right to raise them as she saw fit. It was a price she could not pay. Others whispered she stayed because escape was not an option. In Monaco, the royal family is not merely symbolic. They are the national identity, the living brand that fuels its reputation, its tourism, its economic stability. A royal divorce would not just stain reputations, it would shake the entire foundation upon which Monaco's delicate ecosystem rests. The stakes were too high. The illusion had to be preserved. So Charlene endured. Yet survival took many forms. Behind the glittering facade, she found quiet ways to resist. She threw herself into charitable work with relentless focus. She expanded her foundation, focusing on children's safety and sports education. She championed humanitarian causes far from the glare of Monte Carlo's casinos and yachts. Each outreach program became a rebellion in miniature, a way to reclaim some semblance of control over her life. The Princess Charlene of Monaco Foundation became her true kingdom. It was not grand state dinners or high society balls that defined her now, but water safety campaigns, humanitarian aid, and community programs. Away from the suffocating expectations of royalty, she rediscovered fragments of the woman she had once been. Meanwhile, Prince Albert continued to weather his own storms. Old paternity scandals resurfaced. New rumors ignited. Each headline chipped away at the pristine image Monaco fought so desperately to maintain. Yet Albert soldiered on, attending galas, opening museums, shaking hands with dignitaries. Stability mattered more than reality. Inside Monaco's tight circles of influence, the same quiet question echoed again and again. Could the marriage survive? Could Charlene endure the life she had never truly chosen? Could Albert keep the illusion intact long enough for the dynasty's next generation to take root? The stakes were astronomical. For all its breathtaking wealth and billionaire playground reputation, Monaco remains a fragile construct. It relies on stability, on tradition, on the constant projection of effortless glamour. Cracks in the royal marriage did not just threaten personal happiness. They threatened the very economy, the national mythos. Charlene's suffering was never truly her own. Her pain became Monaco's risk, its potential embarrassment, the world's morbid fascination. Her grief fed tabloids, fueled rumors, and challenged the carefully cultivated fantasy of paradise by the sea. And in a final cruel twist, even her endurance became another piece of the illusion. At state dinners, she smiled. At official ceremonies, she curtsied. At the Monaco Yacht Show, she waved from the deck of the royal yacht with studied grace. But those closest to her knew the woman in the photographs was a shadow, and no €12 million contract could rebuild what had already been broken beyond repair. The golden cage remained locked, and Princess Charlene learned to survive inside it. Cracks in the crown. Beneath the polished glamour of Monaco's bright lights, the foundations were shifting. Princess Charlene's long absences, her visible frailty, her haunting silence, they could no longer be hidden behind glossy press releases or carefully choreographed public appearances. By the time 2022 arrived, it was clear to even the most loyal royal watchers, something inside the Grimaldi Palace was splintering. The official version remained stubbornly optimistic. Princess Charlene was recovering. Princess Charlene was committed to her royal duties. Princess Charlene was united with her husband and children. But the photographs told another story. She returned briefly for small events, appearing more like a guest in her own life than the sovereign's wife. Her posture stiff, her smiles fleeting, her gaze drifting somewhere far beyond the dazzling camera flashes. In moments where the public longed for reassurance, they found only absence, the kind that no carefully worded statement could disguise. Meanwhile, Prince Albert worked overtime to maintain the public illusion. He gave interviews, downplaying her long stay in South Africa as purely medical. He insisted their marriage was strong, their family united. Yet every word weighed heavier, revealing the strain beneath the surface. His optimism, once natural, now seemed rehearsed. His defenses grew sharper, more brittle. Each protestation betrayed not strength, but a desperate need for control over a narrative slipping further from his grasp. The citizens of Monaco, fiercely loyal to their tiny nation, wanted to believe him. A fractured royal marriage was not just a personal scandal, it was a national threat. Monaco's wealth, its tourism, its reputation on the world stage all depended on the fairy tale remaining intact. The image of a glamorous, sophisticated, and united principality was a currency more valuable than any balance sheet. If that image shattered, so too might the precarious foundation on which Monaco's prosperity rested. Whispers grew louder. Charlene had returned, yes, but was living separately from Albert, in a quiet residence with the twins, away from the palace's main halls. Some insiders described it delicately: space to heal. Others more bluntly, a polite separation disguised as tradition. The story shifted depending on the audience, but the underlying truth felt immutable. Something vital between them had broken, and no public smile could mend it. Despite public appearances together, the gap between Charlene and Albert widened like a crack under relentless pressure. Monaco's traditionally deferential press began to hint at tensions. Carefully couched phrases, seeking balance, focusing on family, became common, thin veils over the roiling instability beneath. International tabloids, unbound by loyalty, published speculative exposés with lurid headlines. Each cover story, each whispered account, chipped further away at the facade. The pressure mounted when the couple traveled abroad. Their interactions, once warm and casual, became cold and mechanical. No hand-holding, no affectionate glances, only stiff formality, and strained smiles for the cameras. Once, during a charity gala in Paris, Charlene turned slightly away from Albert during a group photo. The movement was small, almost imperceptible, but to the eagle-eyed observers who watched every gesture for meaning, it spoke volumes. In March of 2022, Charlene posted a photograph on social media that ignited controversy. Alone against a cold, minimalist backdrop, regal but undeniably sad. No Prince Albert, no children. The caption spoke of strength and resilience, but conspicuously avoided any mention of love or family. It was a silent manifesto, a portrait of a woman who had begun to understand her survival depended not on appearances, but on fortifying herself from within. The palace scrambled to contain the fallout, but skepticism only grew. Behind the scenes, another old strategy resurfaced. Focus on the children. Prince Jacques and Princess Gabriella, Monaco's future, were thrust increasingly into the public eye. They appeared at palace balconies, charity events, parades, smiling for cameras, waving tiny hands, reciting speeches. The innocence of childhood became a shield against the gathering storms. If the marriage was faltering, the children would become the anchor, the proof that continuity still existed, that hope for the dynasty's future remained. Charlene, despite everything, played her role. She stood proudly behind her son and daughter, holding their hands, whispering encouragement during ceremonies. Her devotion to them never wavered. In a life stripped of control, her children became the last refuge she could truly claim. Every soft murmur, every hand squeezed in reassurance, was an act of quiet defiance against a system that demanded endless sacrifices. Still, the strain showed. At one particularly uncomfortable event later that year, a video captured Charlene and Albert at an awards ceremony. Standing side by side, Albert leaned in to whisper something to his wife. Her reaction, a sharp intake of breath, a blink, a stiff nod, sparked widespread analysis. Was it irritation? Resignation? Fear? No consensus emerged, only agreement that the tension was palpable. Even seasoned body language experts were divided, though most agreed that the exchange was not one of warmth or ease. Inside the palace, traditions continued. Dinners, galas, state ceremonies all marched forward with grim determination. Monaco clung to its rituals as if they could hold back the inevitable. Red carpets were rolled out, orchestras played, dignitaries toasted, but the effortless magic the principality once traded on had begun to fade. The performances grew mechanical, the smiles strained. The seams of the royal facade, once invisible, now caught the light at inconvenient angles. Among the elite, the billionaires, aristocrats, and old confidants, questions swirled. How long could Charlene endure this existence? How long could Albert maintain the facade? The private lounges of Monte Carlo buzzed with speculation, theories weaving through the smoke of expensive cigars and the clink of champagne glasses. Charlene, some said, was negotiating terms for a permanent separation. Others argued she was preparing for a slow withdrawal, one that would leave Monaco with its fairy tale mostly intact, even as she disappeared from its stage. Rumors clashed behind closed doors. Some insiders whispered that divorce negotiations had already begun. Others suggested Charlene was crafting a slow, dignified exit that would preserve the monarchy's fragile image. Still others believed she would remain indefinitely, tethered by love for her children and the golden chains of a €12 million agreement. Whichever theory held the most truth, it was clear to all that the old certainties no longer applied. Whatever the truth, one fact remained inescapable. Princess Charlene was no longer the woman who had once captured the world's imagination. Life inside the palace had tested her. It had changed her. It had wounded her in ways no official portrait could conceal. Her eyes, once open and searching, now seemed to carry entire histories of disappointment. Her presence had become quieter, sharper, more dangerous to the myth that sustained the crown. The fairy tale had splintered beyond repair. As Monaco marched into a new year, the future of its royal family hung in an uneasy balance. Tourists still crowded the palace gates, snapping photos and buying souvenir crowns. High rollers still gambled fortunes in Monte Carlo. Yachts floated like jewels in the harbor. On the surface, life glittered as ever. But inside the royal apartments, where opulence masked exhaustion, the silence told another story. And Princess Charlene, standing at the crossroads between duty and freedom, carried the weight of a kingdom that could no longer hide its cracks. The last stand of a princess. In the quiet golden haze that wraps itself around the palace every evening, Princess Charlene walks the stone halls like a ghost. She is still there, draped in Dior and burdened with titles, but the woman the world once knew has evolved into something sharper, quieter, and much more dangerous to the fairy tale Monaco once sold. By the beginning of 2023, the signs of change were impossible to ignore. Charlene appeared healthier, stronger, but also colder. She attended royal events with precision, not warmth. She stood by Albert's side, but the distance between them had become almost architectural, invisible, yet massive, built brick by brick from years of silence, betrayal, and survival. If Charlene had once been a reluctant princess, now she was something else entirely, a sovereign force moving through the gilded world on her own terms. Gone were the wide, uncertain smiles of her early days. Gone were the attempts to blend into Monaco's stiff traditions. The tiaras, the galas, the orchestrated family portraits, no longer shackles but mere theater props she could discard at will. Now Charlene embraced the role of an untouchable icon, wrapped in sleek suits and fierce minimalist fashion. She had become a symbol not of royalty's romance, but of its brutal cost. Every glance, every gesture seemed carved from ice. Insiders whispered that a new deal had been quietly crafted. Charlene would continue her public duties. She would appear at critical moments, charity balls, national holidays, diplomatic events. She would smile, wave, and maintain the illusion that the royal family remained united. It was a performance meticulously curated, a chess game played with public expectations. But behind closed doors, she lived separately. Her private apartments were off limits. Her personal staff answered only to her. And her true loyalty lay not with Albert or the Grimaldi dynasty, but with her own survival. The fairy tale had ended. What remained was an arrangement, a truce signed not in ink, but in broken dreams and cold calculations. A silent treaty with invisible clauses that protected her sanity, her dignity, and most of all, her autonomy. A princess, yes, but one who had carved her existence from the bones of disappointment. Still, Monaco needed her. Without Charlene, the royal family's image would collapse under the weight of its own scandals. Prince Albert alone, burdened by decades of whispered affairs, acknowledged paternity suits, and diplomatic awkwardness, could not carry the pristine image Monaco needed to sell itself to billionaires and tourists alike. The gleaming casinos, the yacht-studded harbor, the glamour draped over its narrow streets. It all needed a face, a symbol of grace under pressure. Charlene, even diminished, even scarred, was still the most valuable jewel in the crown. And she knew it. She wielded her position like a blade now, cutting away obligations she no longer found tolerable. She minimized her public appearances, focusing instead on her charitable foundations. She chose projects close to her heart: children's safety, sports education, conservation efforts. Causes that allowed her to operate outside the palace walls to craft a legacy that was hers alone. Her foundation expanded its reach. Water safety programs blossomed across Africa and Europe. Scholarships for young athletes grew. Conservation projects flourished. Wherever Charlene's influence touched, real change followed. Real, tangible outcomes that no amount of royal pageantry could manufacture. She had turned pain into purpose, using the very platform meant to cage her as a weapon of transformation. The citizens of Monaco, many of whom once pitied the sad princess trapped in a golden cage, began to view her differently. Respect replaced pity. Admiration replaced gossip. Here was a woman who had been fed into the royal machinery and had emerged, bruised but unbroken, carving her own space out of a world designed to consume her. Meanwhile, Prince Albert continued his carefully staged public appearances, smiling, shaking hands, insisting that all was well. But even he could not stop the shifting tide of public opinion. The cracks in the monarchy's image had grown too wide to patch. New generations, less loyal to ancient bloodlines and more interested in authenticity, looked at the royal couple and saw not a fairy tale, but a deal. A silent arrangement stitched together with necessity rather than affection. Behind the scenes, succession plans quietly moved forward. Prince Jacques, just a child, was already being groomed for future leadership. Lessons in diplomacy, traditions, and the delicate balancing act of public life filled his days. The hope was that by the time he came of age, the scars of the present would have faded into distant memory, and the monarchy could sell a new illusion, one unsullied by the quiet tragedies of his parents. But Charlene's legacy would not be so easily erased. She had fought for her identity in a world that demanded she surrender it. She had protected her children from the worst of the palace intrigues. She had endured humiliation after humiliation and still found ways to transform pain into purpose. Every cold glance, every polite smile that hid 1,000 betrayals had been a step toward reclaiming her voice. She was not the Princess Monaco wanted. She was the princess Monaco needed and, perhaps, deep down, deserved. A mirror held up to the old world, reflecting back its failures in sharp, glittering fragments. As 2023 melted into 2024, Charlene's appearances became even more strategic. She appeared at the Monaco Grand Prix, dazzling and distant in a sleek white suit. She attended the Red Cross Ball, icy and immaculate, her smile more shielded than invitation. Every move was measured, every word was weighed. She had learned the brutal lessons of royal life the hardest way possible. And she had survived. In whispered corners of Europe's elite society, Charlene became a legend, not for fairy tale romance, but for quiet, relentless endurance. Her name was spoken with a kind of awe, usually reserved for battle-hardened queens of old, women who had outlasted kingdoms, wars, betrayals. She was compared not to modern royals, but to ancient figures, Catherine de' Medici, Eleanor of Aquitaine, women who bend history itself rather than break under its weight. The crown no longer sat lightly upon her head. It pressed down with the full weight of centuries of expectation, sacrifice, and suffering. But Charlene wore it anyway. Not for love, not for tradition, not for appearances, for herself. For the quiet revolution she waged every day by simply continuing to exist on her own terms, within walls meant to silence her. In the end, the world had it backwards all along. Charlene was never the fragile, helpless figure trapped by fate. She was the storm hidden beneath the still waters. She was the quiet rebellion that refused to be snuffed out. She was the survivor who chose every day to stay, not because she had no choice, but because she knew that sometimes survival is the most defiant victory of all. Princess Charlene's silence was never weakness, it was survival. What do you think her next move will be? Leave your thoughts below, like the video, and subscribe for more stories behind royal walls.